In this video, I want to show you a cool tool that I built for DaVinci Resolve that essentially functions like a magnifying glass inside of the program. Basically lets you select an area on the screen and then bring that up a little bit bigger, draw some attention to it, and even animate it between multiple points on the screen. You can just have it zoom on and off, add in some drop shadows, and even have it follow a tracker around the screen, all from the edit page without any keyframes. So let's take a look. Okay, in DaVinci Resolve, we just have a quick demo video that has a Blackmagic camera, and we just want to magnify the ISO position right here. And so there's a few ways we can add this in. WippMagnify functions as an effect, which applies to the clip itself, or as a generator, which basically works like an adjustment clip. So for something like this, I like using the generator version because I just have a lot more flexibility and can visually see where it is and move it all around. So to grab that, up in the effects tab under generators, we can find WippMagnify in the EditorCollection section. EditorCollection is a pack that I built for DaVinci Resolve, which I'll talk more about at the end. For now, let's talk about WippMagnify and drag this down onto the timeline and put that right above the video. And right away, you can see what it's doing. It's just zooming on into this little circle and just zooming into the clip and then dimming everything in the background, so that way it draws the attention to whatever we put inside of that. Now, one thing with this tool, you do want to come down to the bottom left of the viewer and turn on the fusion overlay. So that way you can grab right in the screen, you can move this position around, you can change the size of the circle. So let's say we want to do the ISO button, we're going to position it just like so, and that's going to update all the animations so that way it starts and ends in that position, and that looks really good. We'll talk about reframing this later and actually tracking it onto the ISO button. For now, we're just going to go through some of the different settings. So in the inspector, the first thing we have is this zoom and move mode. We'll talk about that in a second. Basically, it has to do with the animations and will allow us to do like multi-point animations where we move this all around the screen. But the next main thing is the magnify scale. So this basically chooses how much it's going to scale in inside of that shape. Then we also have the mask zoom, which has to do with the animation. So if I set the mask zoom to be 0, what that means is that the mask is not going to animate. So you see right now, all it is doing is zooming in and then fading the background. If I set the mask zoom to be 1, you can see that that mask shape is actually going to animate onto the screen. So what I like doing is putting this a little bit in the middle, kind of like 0.8, and that way it has some parallax and it just adds a whole lot to the animation and makes it look way better. Then the other thing that makes it look really good is the background zoom. So if I set this to be 0, the background is not going to move at all, but adding in some background zoom allows it to zoom in, and it zooms the background in around that point. So as I move this around, you can see the background is shifting too, because wherever I set this is essentially where the pivot point for that zoom is going to be. Again, that little detail just brings a lot more attention to whatever is inside of your shape. Speaking of the shape, we can choose which shape that we want to use. So we have a circle or we have a rectangle. And when I do a rectangle, it's going to update the on-screen controls. So now I can move this around. So depending on what you're actually highlighting, you might want to use a rectangle or a circle. And depending on what you choose, you'll have some controls down here. So like for the rectangle, we can adjust the corner radius, whereas with the circle, we can't because it's a circle. You don't have corners. All right, this match button has to do again with the mode up here and doing multi-point animations. We're gonna come back and talk about that in just a little bit. It's a really cool feature. But first we have the drop shadow, and that does exactly what you think. It's gonna cast a drop shadow around the outside of the shape onto the background image. If I click off to the side, you can see that really helps to create some separation from the background, versus if I turn that off, it just blends in too much. Another way you can create that separation is by using an outline. We can just press the enable button, adds a white outline that we can change the thickness as well as the color with the settings right here. Now under effects, this is everything that happens to the background as well as the inner shadow. So if I do inner shadow, it's going to cast a shadow inside of this circle. So if I set this color to be white, we can make like a glass look, like it's reflecting off the edges of like a magnifying glass. Pretty cool. I enjoy this one. And then we also have some color correction, which basically allows us to change the brightness of the background as well as the saturation if you want to dim that. And then the last one we have is the blur intensity, which, as the name suggests, just chooses how much blur that the background is going to have. And no matter what you set these to, they're going to animate off at the beginning and end. So that way we start from the original media and then it animates all of these effects on and draws attention to whatever's inside of the magnifying glass. Skipping the tracker for 1 second, let's look at the AnimEngine. So this is using AnimEngine version 4 and it has real-time motion blur. So in this case, I'm going to bring the motion blur up to something like 0.5. And when I press play, I'm just going to pause it here. You can see it's starting to blur those edges. The animation's a bit slow, so it's hard to see what's going on. But once we start getting into the multi-point animations, that's where the motion blur really shines. So how this works is you can set how long it actually takes to animate. You can turn off animations. Like if I don't want it to animate out, I can just press that button right there. And then you can also adjust the easing curves right down here using these preset menus, or by setting this to be a fully custom curve that you can edit right here. It also has some really nice start here and end here buttons, which you don't use as much on the generator version because you can just, shift this back and forth forth. You can make this shorter, do that type of stuff. But what you could do instead is move your playhead and say, okay, I want the animation to start right here. And as you can see, it's going to add an offset of 1.1 seconds. So that way it does nothing until where our playhead was, and then it animates on from there. So again, with the generator version, normally I just recommend, moving it like that because it's a lot more visual and you know what's happening. But if you're using the effect version, which is isolated to just the clip, you can't shrink it back and forth. So using those set start and set end buttons are going to be really helpful. All right, but let's look at the tracker and then save the best for last with the multi-point animation. So in this case, what I wanted to do is follow the ISO button. And the important thing to know is once you do a track, you can't shift this back and forth. Otherwise you'll have to redo the track again. So what we're going to do is just go all the way to the beginning. We're going to come down to the tracker and then enable the tracker. When I do that, we have some on-screen controls show up. So you do need to make sure that you have those on in order to use this. And then we can grab this point. We're just going to position it right over the ISO. We're going to make the solid line box just fit that button because this is what we want to track. And then the dotted line, we're going to make just a little bit bigger. This chooses the area that it's allowed to look for that button. So if it has a lot of movement, you'll want to make that big. If there's not a lot of movement, you want to make that small so that way it doesn't take as long to track. But once that's done, we'll come down to the buttons and we're going to press the one all the way on the right to track it all the way forward. When these buttons are grayed out, that means it's tracking. And then when those light up again and you can't press the stop button anymore, that means the track is done and you can see the path on the screen if you need to go in and adjust it. But when I press play, now it's going to animate on and it's just going to move around and it's going to be locked off to that ISO button. If needed, you can come in here and adjust the tracker offset just to reposition this. So maybe I want to do the shutter button, the shutter speed button, and that's close enough. So I can just, move that around and then get it locked off to that. Really cool. And if you need it, we also have some different tracking modes if you weren't able to get a track just with the default settings. Now, something people ask about this tool is if you can use the tracker to track a mouse movement. And while sometimes you can get away with it, I wouldn't recommend buying this tool for that purpose because it takes a while to track and isn't always reliable. So in this case, let's just try it. We have a mouse right up here that's adjusting some controls. So what I'm going to do is come down to the tracker, enable the tracker, and it's really important how you actually position this. We want to make sure that this box is very small. We just want to have the mouse inside of it. We don't want to be picking up any other information around it. And honestly, shrinking this down just a little bit so that way it, can see some of the distinct shapes in the mouse, but it can't really see anything behind it. And then we want the tracking area to be quite big because the mouse moves really fast around the screen. And if you're working on like a system that has a bigger mouse icon, that'll make it track a little bit better. But in this case, we're going to try that and then track this forward. And when I press play, you can see it's going to zoom in. What we might want to do is change the magnify scale. And if I click off here, you can see it's actually doing a pretty good job of following the mouse there. It usually locks on no problem. The issue is if I bring it over something like this white color here, the mouse blends in too much that it might lose it. So just be careful with that. It might take a while to track if you end up doing it, but it's absolutely something you can try if you need to do a lot of that. Okay, but the other way you can get it to move around is using the multi-point animations, which is super cool. So let's grab WippMagnify, drop this on the timeline, and this only works with the generator version. You can't do it with the effect version. So what we're going to do is let this zoom in. We're going to set all of our settings right away, like the drop shadow, the outline, any of the background effects. And then what I'm going to do is make this a bit smaller. We're going to look at the mouse, maybe zoom in this a little bit. And when I press play, we also want to come down to the AnimEngine and just set how much motion blur we want right away. That way we don't have to go through and do it in 5 or 6 versions of WippMagnify in the end. All right, so just zooming through here, you can see I'm adjusting the padding. Maybe I'll move this over just a little bit. And when I go down to start changing the shape settings, which is right here, what I'm going to do is split this clip in half, split WippMagnify, and then just move forward a little bit so I can see it animated on. And we're just going to shift this down and maybe make this a little bit smaller just to show you what it can do. Once I've done that, all I have to do is press this match button and it's going to figure out what it needs to do to go from the old version, which is big like this, and then zoom down to the smaller version. And when it did that, you can see it switch it to the move animation mode, which basically just adds in a second on-screen control, which allows us to change the start position. So if you want, you can do this manually, have it start from over here and then move off to the side. But I just like using the match button, and if I press refresh, you can see it's going to update that, so that way it still matches with the previous one. And if I go through, split it again, and say on this one, I want to come all the way over to the media pool or the effects tab and show the tool that I'm using, I can just press the refresh button again. and now it's gonna do a seamless transition from both sides of the screen. Super seamless, super flexible. And like, this is where that motion blur looks really nice. It looks like the background video cuts out there a little bit, but yeah, it's super smooth. And again, this all renders in real time, so it's nice and quick, and you don't have to wait hours for your motion blur to render. And that's WippMagnify from the Editor Collection. Editor Collection is a really cool pack that I've been working on that has like 20 tools just like this that have the AnimEngine, so no keyframes, and just a ton of customization right from the edit page. It's what I use to edit all of these videos, doing stuff like the zooms into the screen, the magnify effects, putting my camera down in the corner, and just a bunch of other effects like that. And you can learn more at the link down below, where you can see a preview of all the tools and click on them to get access to the full tutorial. It's something that saves me hours in each project, and I think it can help you out a lot as well. So let me know if you have any questions about this, and I'll see you in the next video.